Welcome to the Geekly. My name is Jules.
I'm Lex, and today we're talking about season 2 of the Twilight Zone, first 3 episodes of season 2 of Doom Patrol, and the final season of Dark. So we're just going to start off with the Twilight Zone. We reviewed season 1, and we were not alone in feeling that season 1 was largely kind of lukewarm and it's not as edgy as Dark Mirror, but also lacks the essence of the original somehow. Even though I don't think the original Twilight Zone would stand up in a contemporary setting because it's very of its time. But overall, we felt the presence of Jordan Peele should have elevated the show to higher standards than it seemed to have, and most of the episodes were trite to say the least. So in episode 2 of season 2, it's called Downtime, and Marina Baccarin stars as Michelle, a newly promoted hotel manager who seems to have everything she wants until the nature of reality itself gets turned upside down. It's also written by Jordan Peele, which is why we decided to do this one instead of the first episode. Okay, so from my perspective, since it was written by Jordan Peele, the world was kind of structured as I expected it to be. It was fairly competent. I mean, that sounds condescending, but what I mean is he gives us enough to shape the world for the length of the episode, but not so much that we're bogged down in all the details, as happens sometimes. So we get the gist. It seems real, and we're able to focus on what's happening with Michelle. The teenage skateboarders were interesting, I thought, but I'm kind of fascinated by the fact that children and teenagers in media are always kind of inherently creepy. I love the use of them in film and television to be this kind of ominous presence. In terms of the plot, for the most part, I was pleasantly surprised. Given last season, I really didn't expect much. I mean, I didn't expect horrible, but I imagined it would be kind of tepid like last season was. I did have some hope that with Peel writing this one, it would be interesting, if not Twilight Zoney, and I wasn't disappointed in that. He's an excellent writer, but I think where the story falls down is the timing. At one point I looked at how much time was left and wondered how it was possibly going to end in a satisfactory way, which I seem to be doing a lot lately when I watch stuff. It's how are they going to wrap this up? And basically, it didn't. I think with possibly another 5 minutes, it could have been a good ending, but for me, it just came shy of the mark. One reviewer commented that the episode seemed to end with a shrug, and I agree with that, though not in the same context. I think the story got to a certain point, realized it was time to end, and then just sort of meh did way through the resolution, which left me more disappointed.
I found this linear, superficial, incredibly uninspired, almost entirely boring. And throughout the whole of the episode, all it did was evoke other shows and other projects recently that had done avatars. Kind of Ready Player One, which is a very imperfect kind of concept. I know that. I actually thought a lot about Striking Vipers, the Black Mirror episode, which I know you hated with a passion. I actually quite enjoyed that. Yeah, I was left pretty flat by this episode, and it's strange how we've come out with this different impression of maybe the Twilight Zone and what it will be like in season 2, because this is very much, for me, more of the same. This was no different to me than watching those 2 episodes of Amazing Stories that we watched earlier this year. It really did tantalise me on 2 occasions where I thought, okay, they've just dangled the carrot of this going from one-dimensional into two-dimensional, and if they carry it off, it'll be kind of three-dimensional. I won't talk about what those things are, but in both occasions I actually felt that they kind of bailed out rather than committing to what are quite important topics for today, I think. But no, she kind of shrugged. I would agree with the word shrug on both occasions. I'm very disappointed, I think, still with the whole attempt to rekindle this old franchise, and I haven't seen anything here that's given me any kind of renewed hope, plot or world building wise.
In your mind, what would the rest of the season need to do to kind of redeem itself for you?
It's interesting because I was actually going to ask you what was wrong with season 1, and I feel they're kind of similar questions actually. I watched this. I mean, what were your overriding emotions when you were watching Amazing Stories? Because I think we largely felt it was did we use the word hallmark?
Yeah, It felt like, one of those Lifetime
Yeah,
movies. It just went, yeah, it was gross.
this is to me exactly the same as that. This person's learning a very kind of simplistic moral or something over this period of time, and there's nothing interesting about it. It's told in such a very sterile, obvious way. At least we weren't kind of bashed over the head, in the way that we were with the President one. Maybe we were slightly with the Not All Men episode. But this, it's just doing nothing for me. And it was only like half an hour long, and it just felt like it was going on forever. And I keep talking about the fact that we watched Better Than Us this year, where it was just, oh my god, I was so engaged. I was so engaged. These hour-long episodes, every episode, and they would just fly by. But this just dragged. We could try watching another one. Apparently, there is. I've read some reviews about the season as a whole. People seem to have largely the same problems, but apparently there is one truly superb episode, which is episode 3, which I haven't watched. But I'd be prepared to give that a go. But as for the Twilight Zone in general, I'm just not feeling this reboot at all. Can I ask you what was wrong with season 1? Maybe in a slightly more depth, and what you think this may be, how you think maybe they've solved the issues then.
I don't know that they've actually solved the issues with the show. This episode kind of had a leg up or two with me for two reasons. One, the subject matter is also my current like research fascination, obsession. Plus, Marina Baccarin, who I find fascinating. So I was already kind of into it from there. Also, really fond of Jordan Peele's writing. In terms of improving the season and exactly what was wrong with the first season, like honestly, I don't know. It's like this kind of intangible quality. I do think there is a place for this show. I mean, maybe not with diehard Twilight Zone fans, but for people who want a little bit of quirky in their lives. The thing I hope for the most is that it just shakes off the last vestiges of the original series. Like, I don't think the Twilight Zone brand is doing it any favors.
I think
I
that's
think
a
there's
very. Can I just say? I think it's a very reasonable point that you've just made, and I would agree with that. I don't think it's doing it any favors at all.
Yeah, I mean, like the themes and questions of every episode are always really intriguing and really interesting, but the execution of those ideas inevitably falls down in one way or another. So you might be able to have some interesting post credits conversations about the ideas in the episode. If you're watching this on your own and don't have somebody to kind of debate ideas with, you will probably leave very unsatisfied. And perhaps even if you have, somebody to watch it with and try to have a conversation, you may leave unsatisfied because the episodes do always fall down. They're incomplete. And, as I said, like this episode is well written, the performances are excellent. It really only comes up short in terms of the ending. And while some people might find that forgivable, I think that if any part of a story should not be sloppy, the end is one of them. And I think that that's probably a big part of why season 1 was not so great, and possibly what you're feeling in this episode as well. I think the kind of feeling of incompleteness is one that I had throughout season 1. It felt like these were half formed ideas that weren't quite ready for public consumption.
Recently, I can't remember what it was that we watched, and I said they didn't even try, and you said that was the like cardinal sin, and you agreed they just didn't even try. This isn't too dissimilar, and the fact that it was written by Jordan Peele, when we know what he's capable of at the moment. The man's an Oscar winning. Did he win the Oscar for the writing of Get
I
Out?
I, I have no idea, but if he didn't, he should have.
I think he got it for the writing. I think he was also up for director, but I think he won it for the writing. And I've got a very different take on the writing. I think Marina Baccarin really gave life to something that was DOA. I just feel like they didn't even try. I feel like this is a very poorly fleshed out world, and the story is it's only half an hour, but it barely they've had to really kind of stretch it to fit over 30 minutes worth of time. Yeah, this is an absolute dud for me. I think going back to the Hallmark thing, which I think was something you said about Amazing Stories, I think that was your call. This feels like Hallmark TV, and it feels like it's maybe for an older audience who aren't used to, multiple running. I mean, the people who watch this they'd have a brain aneurysm if they watched Dark. I think people who would really kind of appreciate this kind of simplistic storytelling with a very simple moral would watch Dark and they'd have a fucking heart attack. They'd be like, what is going on? But yeah, I'm sure there is an audience for this, but it's really not me. So.
See, I view it as kind of like a spectrum. Amazing Stories, Twilight Zone reboot, and Black Mirror. With maturity levels, like Amazing Stories, I would kind of show to maybe like preteen audiences.
I honestly thought you were going to say octogenarians.
Come on, octogenarians have taste. They don't need simple things. Don't be ageist, Jules.
No, because Amazing Stories to me is a bygone era. It's that kind of storytelling of like a kind of original run Twilight Zone in the 50s and 60s. That's how it feels to me. It feels so wholesome, Amazing Stories. So that's why I was putting it at that age of the spectrum, not at the younger age of the spectrum.
I would say kind of, Amazing Stories is the child version of this concept. And maybe it's not necessarily the audience, but the actual maturity level of the shows themselves. So like Amazing Stories is the baby. Twilight Zone is the conflicted middle child that doesn't really know who it is right now. And but Dark Mirror is, like the kind of quintessential alternative, edgy, newly adult trying to kind of hack out their separate identity from their parents and family group, and that's why I think that Twilight Zone has an audience somewhere, because I think that in a lot of ways, I think Dark Mirror is the superior show, but I do also recognize that a lot of the themes and concepts in it, many people would find uncomfortable and crass, I guess is the word I'm thinking of. So maybe it goes back to that wholesome thing you were talking about. I would give this episode kind of 6 out of 10. Probably wouldn't recommend it to anybody. Not overly interested in the rest of the season. I mean, if episode 3 is supposed to be spectacular, sure, we can check it out and see if it actually holds up. But I think the Twilight Zone reboot is a largely forgettable television show. Okay, so we did the first 3 episodes of Doom Patrol Season 2, and just to kind of have a little bit of a recap, in Season 1, we meet the various members of the Doom Patrol, largely through the introduction of NASCAR driver Clifford Steele, after he's fatally injured in a car accident, and Niles Calder transplants his brain into a robot body. We also have Rita Farr, who is a 1950s actress who was exposed to a toxin that makes her body essentially turn to goo. And Larry Trainer, who's my favorite, who was exposed to some sort of radiation during a test flight into space and is now possessed by a negative energy entity in this weird sort of symbiotic relationship. And then we also have Vic Stone, also known as Cyborg, who kind of floats in and out of the group. Like, he's not part of the Doom Patrol, but he hangs around an awful lot. So yeah, he's there. So essentially the main drive of the season is that Mr. Nobody kidnaps Calder, and the Doom Patrol is trying to find him and rescue him while also sorting through their various personal and interpersonal issues. So that is the kind of very basic recap of what happened in first season, which is a lot of stuff. It was given by Rotten Tomatoes 96%, IMDb said 8 out of 10, and Metacritic said 70. For the most part, people like the show's weirdness and that it leans into the oddball dysfunctionality of what is known as the world's strangest superheroes, which they very much are.
And I just want to say to everybody, you can find our reviews of all 15 episodes from Season 1 in the Geekly episodes 27 to 41. So if you want to go back and refresh any parts of our opinions back then, those are the episodes to find. Yeah, I mean, my own opinions on Season 1 briefly were that I would say it was about 70% of it seemed to be about this team who had all made mistakes in the past. They're all learning to kind of forgive themselves. I think by the end of Season 1, they'd all moved to a better place and they'd begun to embrace their powers. And in the final episode, we actually see them forming the very earliest version of what is the Doom Patrol. I think my issue so far with Season 2 is a lot of that character development has kind of been forgotten. I think Cliff's is the one that's most dissolved. He's gone straight back to kind of episodes 1 to 5 Cliff. He's just a very angry man, very sweary man. I think Rita is the only one so far that's kept her character development for season 1. She's very much got this new energy to her, this new positivity, a kind of bravery as well, because she was somebody that she would barely leave the house. You know, they'd say, Rita, we've got to go and save somebody. And she'd be like, no, I'm not a superhero. Go on without me, kind of thing. And now she's, if anything, the most likely to, she led a team meeting in episode 2, which I thought was fantastic. Still don't know how I feel about Cyborg. Still don't know if he's a natural. I mean, he's not necessarily a Doom Patrol member, but I don't even know whether he's a natural part of this show still. I still have to be won over with Cyborg, and the storyline we're getting from him so far, and I'm assuming this is non-spoilers, is very tropey. It's something we've seen kind of mostly done in like Netflix, Marvel, that kind of stuff. New character of the daughter, Dorothy Spinner. Couldn't hate the character more. She's an adorable little cute girl that was rescued by her father in 1920s London. I think that's pretty much the first scene of the whole show. I don't feel like that's a spoiler. The imaginary friends thing on her side seems to be, it's not entirely the same as Jane's, but it's similar enough that I'm kind of like, do we need another situation like this? Niles Calder, the story of Niles Calder, loved him in season 1. And he's been inflicted by this terrible, debilitating illness in season 2. And that debilitating illness is being a good father. The first 3 episodes of him, I don't like what he has become. And it's kind of, it's like we talked about Bruce Wayne in Titans. The man isn't cute and cuddly. Why is he now cute and cuddly? So I find that a little bit jarring. Jane, again, it seems like her character development has largely been forgotten. We seem to be having a very similar story about her in the underground again in season 2. So yeah, so far, talking just about the characters, it seems a great deal of the character development has been forgotten. I loved season 1. Like, I thought it was really good. I would still place it third behind Swamp Thing and Titans, but I really enjoyed it. The thing I didn't enjoy about it was how much time they were dwelling on past failures. And I wanted them to obviously get through them, become better people, become better emotionally. And they did that. That's the thing. They did that. And I kind of thought, oh, great. Season 2, let's move on with like a more complete character. They've had this character development. Let's move forward as kind of more complete people. Let's kind of maybe become the Doom Patrol. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be what we're getting yet. And this season is only 9 episodes due to COVID. So I'm slightly concerned that we're going to have another season that's largely flashbacks in terms of, the characters and their development. But I'll give it a go. I would say that, they've stolen the lens filters and the kind of mood from Titans a lot as well, which kind of is a little bit sad. I feel like the rainbow has been consumed by the storm. But those are my thoughts on the characters so far.
I agree with a lot of what you said. I disagree with some of the things you said. I always find it really interesting when we have like polar opposite views on things. I loved Doom Patrol. I loved season 1. I thought it was great. I absolutely love the characters. I'm a very character centric person, so I thought all of the character development was great. I could watch an entire season of character development and be quite happy. So when we got to season 2, it was kind of like getting together with like a reunion with old friends after a very long time. So I was pretty happy. So obviously all the old favorites are back, and again they're pretty spectacular in their various selves. I mean, this is a very competent, talented cast for the most part, regardless of how different characters are portrayed. The actors all do a great job. Jane, Larry, and Rita are all kind of pretty stellar. Brendan Fraser as Cliff is still stiff, which really bothered me last season, but in these first 2 episodes, I'm beginning to think that's just the character, or maybe Brendan Fraser can't act. I don't know. But like, Cliff doesn't actually know how to deal with people, so he puts on this awkward bluster that's never quite convincing. And I think like last season, I attributed it to like bad writing and bad acting. Now I'm wondering if it's deliberate. If it is deliberate, I very much question that decision in the creative process. But Jane at one point makes a comment about Cliff's codependency. And I think that's a pretty accurate statement in regards to his character. I mean, from the flashbacks from last season, he basically does what other people tell him to do for their approval, and then like he acts like he's resisting or whatever, but he's always looking for direction from somebody else. And that kind of continues in this season. Like last season, I find Larry's story to be particularly moving, but I'm not sure why. I don't know if I identify with him the most out of all the characters, or if I just like the characters the most, or if there's just something inherently heartbreaking about his experiences. I mean, obviously, being a gay man in the 60s and being torn between his wife and children, whom he genuinely seems to care about, even, kind of ineptly, his own happiness and his lover are all very emotional topics. But I think also the combination of performances between Matt Bomer and Matthew Zook, who it does the body acting, really give Larry an extra dimension. I think they add kind of an emotional thing, particularly because Matt Bomer has this like very sort of naive, innocent face. I don't know. It just kind of he's like a little puppy. You mentioned Rita, and I agree with you. I really like Rita this season. April Bowlby, I think, has a very deep understanding of who Rita is, and while like the character often seems quite superficial and petty, her physical movements and facial expressions reveal vulnerability and a need for approval and meaning that Rita herself is desperate to hide, which makes the character very interesting. And I also like that she's come into herself this season. She like you said, she has more confidence. She's a bit more willing to be a hero. She's kind of the instigator of saying, "Come on, guys, we need to do something. We can't just sit around and wallow." And I really like that evolution with the character. I think Rita was definitely underutilized in season one, and as I said, it's nice to see her take more control of her own life in this season, as well as be a more supportive force for her teammates. Plus, like her 70-year friendship with Larry is just so sweet. Like I want to hug them both, and there's like a moment, I can't remember. I think it's in episode 3. There's a moment between the two of them that just like I was just like, oh. And I'm glad that it isn't complicated by this weird unrequited love, flirty potential romance thing that most shows would try to shoehorn in. Calder, yeah, I don't like him this season. He's still focused solely on his own interests and manipulates the team. Dorothy Spinner was a big reveal before the season started, and loads of people were like super excited because apparently she's a big character in the comics. Abigail Shapiro, who plays her, is intriguing in the role, mostly because she's actually 19 and an opera singer, and this is her first like film experience. So I don't know why a 19-year-old is playing an 11-year-old girl or how that works. But mostly I find Dorothy and her imaginary friends to be really annoying, and they can go away. I don't like them. Last season, the theme was very obviously healing in various ways. We had Jane's conflict with her alters and underground, Rita's kind of acceptance of her new life and letting go of her very short career as a starlet, and kind of evolution of Larry's relationship with negative energy, which went from being very kind of antagonistic to more symbiotic. This season, I think, seems like it's going to be very centered around the concepts of mistakes and forgiveness. I think in the first 3 episodes, and I don't know if this is super spoilery, but like every character at some point mentions making mistakes and what happens and they talk about what happens when somebody makes mistakes, and they all kind of have different takes on how a person should take responsibility for their mistakes, or if forgiveness is even possible in some cases. I also think like at this point, like 3 episodes in, there are so many narrative paths at the moment. Like there's so many villains, there's so many obstacles, there's so many bad guys. Like, I mean, I think we got one like every episode, and it just seems like it's scattering out into way too many directions, particularly for a shortened season. So like for the rest of the season, I kind of hope a lot of these kind of narratives don't last for the rest of the season. Like I would like them to be kind of tied up very quickly, and for us to kind of focus on maybe 1 or 2 plot arcs.
I think in season 1, I can't remember if it was a criticism or a compliment that we made, but season 1 was episodic. There was the Mr. Nobody kind of season-long arc, and I think they kind of pretended that was what it was all about. But at the end of the season, when I think back, I see it as episodic. And so I think that is why we are continuing to get like a villain per episode. And I think we will, moving forward, still get a villain per episode. And I don't know whether I like that in this show. You think about Titans. Deathstroke was kind of the season 2 big villain. They had some, little people, in the middle of the season, but I think Doom Patrol may have decided it's episodic. That might be what they think is the best way to do it, because until they get is it 5 members of the team? I can't remember, but until they're all together, I think they're just going to be pairing off and taking on, small villains. What did you think of, or should we not name them maybe? Shall I not talk about them?
The two pseudo villains that we've seen so far were largely unimpressive and definitely underwhelming. I think both of them were kind of built up prior to us meeting them in such a way that they appeared to be real villains, and then we got there and it was kind of like the rug got pulled out from under us. I think 3 episodes in, you should have at least, a minor boss fight. And I agree with you that season 1 was very episodic, and I think for a first season that can work really well. But one of the things that I was really looking forward to with the second season was that it would be more kind of streamlined and more of a serial, rather than the dipping in and out of different characters' pasts and seeing how they came to be where they are. Like I want more of, not necessarily a linear narrative, but like a coherent narrative, if that makes sense.
I would agree with that. I'd like a coherent narrative. I am fully over flashbacks in this show, and they're not going away anytime soon, so I'm gonna have to just put that aside and just plow on. But I'm sick to death of specifically Larry flashbacks as well. Yeah, that's really bothering me. They're kind of at the level of Arrow flashbacks now.
All right. Well, on that note, should we finish up with season 3 of Dark?
We should. I just want to say that Doom Patrol did have a palm slice in as well. So add that one to the tally.
I noticed that, and I was like, Jules is going to bring this up. Yes, there is a palm slice.
There is a palm slice. I'm going to have to go back through all our episodes, find them all, and put them like on our Twitter or something.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, we need to build like a chart or a graph or like some sort of family tree of palm slices in film and television.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to Dark. For anyone interested in seasons 1 and 2 of Dark, we reviewed them in the Geekly episodes 48 and 49. So feel free to go back and listen to those.
Dark season 3. This is the final season in the series, which is a little bit sad, but we'll kind of move past that. The first 2 seasons were both rated fairly high. Rotten Tomatoes gave season 1 89% and season 2 100%. Metacritic said season 1 was 67%, but season 2 jumped up to 82%, so I don't know what was going on there. Basically, though, Dark is about time travel, and as such, it gets very confusing if you don't pay attention. Basically, though, in 2019, children start vanishing from the German town of Venden, which is, as expected, brings out suspicion, secrets, and basically the overall shittiness of the people in the town. So the main focus in season 1 is finding and returning Mikkel Nielsen, who goes missing in the cave system while in the woods with his brother's friends, which gives the season a very kind of intimate family drama feel while also being set in this sci-fi noir atmosphere, which I find very cool. But anyway, so season 2 continues unraveling the connections between the various families, branching out to also include narratives in 2020, 1987, 1954, and 2053. And also 1921. We're introduced to Sigmundus, which is this cult who is vying for control of the ultimate fate of Venden, while each episode counts down towards this seemingly inevitable apocalypse that will destroy the town and everyone in it. Jonas is sort of the main character in this, like young Jonas. There are several of him, as everybody else, and he's basically trying to stop the apocalypse. I just want to preface this by saying Dark is not a bingeable show. I was stupid. I watched the final season over 2 days, Sunday and Monday, and I regret it.
Do you want to know something, Lex? I watched it over Sunday and Monday as well, and I also regret it.
Yeah, you might be able to watch 1 or 2 episodes at a time, but then you want to just stop and think about it and process everything. At one point, I just watched 4 episodes on Sunday night, and I went out and my family member had just watched this thing about like people who disappeared and wormholes and stuff like that, and was trying to explain it to me. And at one point, I just had to say, my brain can't do this right now. So yeah, for the sake of my brain, I wished I'd one spread it out over more days, and two left a bit more time before finishing the season and recording this episode, so that I could just kind of process everything. That said, I'm pretty sure that this Dark is quite possibly my favorite TV show ever. It's really challenging and difficult, and will make your brain hurt. I'm still not sure I understand it all. I definitely do not understand all of the relationships between people, but there really isn't anything I don't like about it. So yeah, like why don't we run through our kind of usual categories? We'll start with like casting and characters, and then move on from there.
I think when it comes to casting, I think it's kind of 10 out of 10 across the board. I have no complaints with any character. I looked on Wikipedia. Wikipedia states that this show has 33 characters. And when you think that some of them were played by 2 actors, some of them were played by 3 actors, 2 of them were actually played by 4 actors, and these are across multiple time periods, occasionally multiple worlds, there must be at least 80 something actors portraying all of these characters. And I cannot think of a single bad performance. I mean, I honestly can't. So my particular favourites were Ulrich, the 3 Jonases, or as I like to call them, the Jonas brothers, Katerina, Hannah, and Claudia Tiedemann. I mean, we're talking. This is the section, the cast and characters section. That I can't think of a single bad thing to say across all 3 seasons. It was all perfect. It really was. And the thing I liked most was that somebody in the 1950s, their version of themselves in the 1980s would actually look like them. They did so well in casting like for like with a 30-year age difference. This is very dense storytelling. And so you'd frequently see, you'd be whisked, 7 decades into the future here or whatever. And you think to yourself, right, who is this? And you have to take a moment. Sometimes I would pause it. And I would have to think to myself, who am I actually looking at right now? Which family line? But occasionally they would actually look the same. And that was really, really helpful to think, okay, I know who you are now because you actually look like your descendant.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't have a huge amount to add besides what you've already said. I think every time we talk about Dark, we talk about how phenomenal the cast is. Particularly considering that there is this massive character list, and that all of them are played by multiple people very seamlessly, like right down to the kind of facial expressions and tiny like micro mannerisms, and as you said, like a lot of them even look alike. I know when we were watching season 1 and season 2, like I actually looked up a lot of the actors to see if they'd done like de-aging or aging on them. Particularly like Ulrich, I think was the first one that I was like, oh my god, that's got to be the same actor. It's got to be the same actor. It's not the same actor. So yeah, they must have put so much work into finding the right people for these roles, and it certainly paid off. The thing I was thinking, particularly with this season, and it didn't really occur to me before, but there is no actual villain in Dark in conventional terms. I don't even think there's a delineation of protagonist versus antagonist. Obviously we have the different factions, particularly in this season, who are all kind of working against each other for different outcomes, but every person is acting in what they think is the best possible way. Like even the suffering that happens, no one enjoys it. No one like wants to inflict suffering on anyone. Everyone is trying to kind of save the whole, but they're all like very flawed, mistaken, and misguided people. So bad things happen as a result of their actions. And in thinking about that, I think watching this show, particularly the last season, that the kind of most important question to keep in mind as you watch it is, what would you do, and what would you be willing to sacrifice to save your world? And by world, I don't mean world in the kind of larger macro sense. I mean like your personal reality, your perception, your family, your friends, the all of the individuals that are connected to your life, like your own personal individual view of life. What would you do to save that? And because I mean, in the end, that's all these characters are really trying to do, and I think that's something that everybody can empathize with, and that is probably why, despite, as you said, being very dense storytelling, this show does have kind of a very devoted following to it that absolutely loves it. And I mean, I will probably watch it again and again, and I'm sure I will find things that I missed the first time around.
There was a lot of talk in the show about just in very kind of general terms, light versus dark. And I think it was about very similar to what you just said. It was about what people were willing to do and how they perceived themselves, and if they were willing to kind of resist. And I think I also thought about a lot about the quote from The Dark Knight about whether you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. It was just about will, I think. A lot of it was about will, and a lot of it was about self-realization. There was a lot of self-discovery in this show, and people, particularly people like Claudia, she maybe didn't think she was capable of a lot of things she actually was. And so she just made a lot of people, okay, you would see them make these conscious decisions about which route they would take. They didn't ever kind of verbalize it, but there were these moments kind of littered throughout it where they, kind of sliding doors moments where you knew, they could either make one decision or another. And we'd often, follow them down that path that they took. I don't know about you, but when I was watching this, it was disorientating at times, but it wasn't like Westworld season 2 where poor storytelling was the reason I felt disorientated. The reason I felt disorientated often watching this was because of me. Like I was to blame. I felt like I was letting the show down rather than vice versa because of how much was thrown at you. In seasons 1 and 2, and this isn't spoilers, we're in the town of Wyndon. I think the story in season 1 maybe is across 4 time periods. In season 2 it's up to like 5 or 6. I think in maybe season 3 it's 7 time periods. And at the end of season 2 we're aware that there are now actually 2 worlds, and each of the worlds has their own different time periods. And then there's another idea thrown in season 3 which I won't mention, not to mention the whole goddamn thing about time travel that's happening as well. There are so many moving parts in this, and God, it is difficult. It is really difficult to keep track. And what I should have done, and you probably feel the same way, is actually watch seasons 1, season 2, and season 3 like back to back to back, to actually give myself a better chance of being able to keep pace with what was happening. I did pretty well. Occasionally I'd have to pause it, as I said. 1 or 2 times I actually have to go on like Wikipedia, check someone's surname because it hadn't been mentioned for a while. But as a result of that, I have to say that I'm more impressed by, this is, as a body of work, I think this is kind of unparalleled. I can't think of any project on TV with this many moving parts that's actually stuck the landing. I would also say that I think I'm more impressed by the scope and scale and the ambition than I am by actually enjoying it. Like, I think I appreciated it more than I enjoyed it, if that makes sense. Appreciated it as a body of work rather than enjoyed it as entertainment, I think, because it isn't bingeable. It requires a commitment by its audience, I think. And I think there are certain people that will watch maybe the first 3 episodes of season 1 or think like, what the hell have I just gotten myself into? But it is very special television. And you've actually said that twice this year, your favourite TV show of all time. So I'd be interested to know Dispatches from Elsewhere and this. We might have to have a versus episode.
Oh man.
I don't know what I'd change about Dark. I don't really know if I would change anything. There were some scenes, and I'll refer to them as pat themselves on the back scenes, where you would quite literally have 15 minutes and the focus would be us learning how somebody essentially travel back in time to become their grandfather's the parent of their grandmother's illegitimate child, so they're their own like great grandfather or something, or mother. You'd occasionally get a scene like that where sometimes you can question whether maybe a few darlings needed to be cut, but that's the worst thing I can say about the show. But I'm really like picking at straws here to try and think of anything I would, as a reviewer, anything I could possibly pull them up for, but I just don't think such a thing exists really. And I think, I honestly think Westworld could learn a lot from this. It was only 8 episodes, hour, and maybe a little bit more length running time. A lot of TV shows could learn from this. Very simplistic. And like you said, the aesthetic, wonderful. I described it as a Wes Anderson decadence mixed with the kind of sparse beauty of Scandi noir, and it really, those two things added together to make something visually, audibly, and just mind-numbingly beautiful.
Yeah, like I don't have a whole lot more to add without just kind of gushing for 20 minutes about how much I love this show. I do want to go back to one thing you mentioned, the act of will in this season, which I found interesting because it's a phrase that comes up quite often throughout the season and is actually the epigram of the first episode. A quote from Arthur Schopenhauer that says, "A man can do as he wills, but not will as he wills," which I think is a very apt quote for the series as a whole. Um, as you said, the show is incredibly atmospheric. You have the woods, the rain. It's always raining, which apparently, according to the Germans on Reddit, is a very November in Germany thing, as well as just standing around in the rain getting wet, even if though you have a hood. I don't know why they do that, but apparently that's a German thing. The thing that really impressed me about Dark is the absolute attention to detail, which stretches to every aspect of the show, from the characters to the plot, the world. The music is fantastic. I actually had to look up the theme song because it is so perfect. And the theme, for anybody who wants to know, is called Goodbye by a band named Apparat, and the music is done by Ben Frost. But like, I really appreciated the music. It was every song was like the right song for that moment. Everything ties together really well, even though there are a lot of really complicated, confusing concepts, a lot of character arcs, a lot of plot arcs, a lot of different settings. I mean, towards the end of season 3, I stopped even counting how many timelines we had. We were just bouncing back and forth all over the place. But you don't actually have to understand all of these concepts entirely to understand the world, or what's going on, or even enjoy it. Honestly, I don't know how I feel about the way it ended. I think part of that is that it requires more thought. I'm not disappointed by the ending. It's just there's still ideas to unpick about the way it ended, and I just really haven't had the time to thoroughly explore those concepts. But yeah, I would give the entire show a 10 out of 10.
One of my favourite films is Memento, and if you get the DVD box set, you get this thing called Memento Mori, where the whole thing is you can watch the entire film in chronological order. I would be so interested to see this in chronological order, just as a kind of curio. I think that would be fascinating.
Yeah, I thought exactly the same thing when it ended. I was just sitting there thinking, I really just want to start to finish from like 1888 to 20 whatever, the whole thing linear chronological, just to see. Yeah, I think that would be interesting. I would love that.
It also made me think of the rain that we're watching also on Netflix, and how this is using the rain better than the rain uses the rain.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, it also makes me not really want to watch the Rain season 3. Yeah, I'd recommend this to all sci-fi fans for sure. I don't know whether I'd recommend it to a casual. It's There's a lot of work I think that needs to be put in as an audience member, but you never know. It's not entry level sci-fi. Let's put it that way. Like maybe Westworld season 1 is a bit of entry level sci-fi. This is intermediate, at least intermediate.
It is at least an intermediate level show. You have to be. It takes a commitment. You have to want a show that will challenge you, that won't give you easy answers. Like, if you're frustrated by Westworld, do not watch this show. This is even more merciless about giving you answers than Westworld is, and you will wait until the very end to get all the answers you want. And even then, you might still be confused, and you might have to watch it again. Like I said, this is not a bingeable show. This is not just pure entertainment. This is a thinking show. You have to work at it. But I would say, writers, watch the show. Like, I don't care if you don't understand it, just watch the fucking show. Philosophers, physicists, kind of scientists in general, people interested in time travel, people interested in interpersonal relationships and things like that, like, and even deeply human questions about morality and will and free will in particular, and destiny. That's another theme. If you're curious about the world, definitely watch this show. If you've watched it and you don't like it for some reason, I don't know how to help you. Okay, thank you for another week with us here at the Geekly. We're going on a slightly different schedule starting in July. We're going to be releasing the Geekly bi-weekly, but to make up for that, we're also going to have 3 new shows to introduce to you. Well, 2 of them aren't so much new, but we're going to continue with Podcast Away, which we've got like several really exciting guests lined up for that. We're also going to continue doing verses. Our next one is going to be Harley Quinn versus Harley Quinn, so that should be fun. And then we have a brand new show that has apparently been named the Lex Files and stuck. So that's what it's going to be called, and that is debuting July 17th to talk about systemic racism, because who doesn't love to talk about that? So yeah, that's kind of our month for July, and yeah, we got exciting stuff happening. So stay tuned.
Thanks for listening. See you in 2 weeks.